I'm Demetri Thomas. I'm 26 years old. I'm a truck driver and unintentional advocate for trans rights and trans ideology.
So when you say like unintentional, what does that mean to you?
Well, for me, it essentially means like I kind of just dropped myself into this. I mean, I've always had different ideas that I've kind of kept to myself, but one day I just suddenly felt like I should say something about it because it was honestly like a little bit of a anger that I was getting, but at the same time I was passionate about what I was talking about. So essentially that's kind of where it started from, was just a form of passion.
Okay. So before we get into that, like how was life like prior to you becoming Demetri?
Well, I grew up in a Christian household. I was I was an evangelical Christian, non-denominational specifically. I was preaching the gospel in various places. I actually went on a mission trip one good time. So, you know, a lot of my life was centered around that. It was centered completely around just representing Jesus and things of that nature. I also grew up in a two-parent household, so my parents was in the home and things of that nature. And they are a part of why I am the way that I am, how strong I am, and passionate I am.
So were you born and raised in Dallas, Texas?
Yes. I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, specifically Rowlett. It's a small town, and that's where I started my journey.
So around what age did you start to become or started to transition?
I started transitioning when back in 2018, and I don't know how old I was in 2018 for some reason. Can't do the math right now. But back when I was in elementary school was when I can recall when I started to have my different feelings. I really didn't understand it, didn't have a name for it, but I can remember I felt like I wanted to be a guy, like every time. There was this one girl in my classroom. We would always sit next to each other, and she was more of a tomboy, more than what I could represent, and I was so envious of her because she was fully herself. She was all like with the guys every time, and I could never do that for whatever reason, mainly just because of my parents and what they represent, being Christians and things of that nature. My dad is actually a pastor to this day, so like, a lot of that pressure was already on being a PK, so.
A key thing that I want to like kind of figure out is that based off the social construct, do you feel like that is where those feelings came from, or do you think it was something internal? Do you think it was a choice, conscious decision? Like what were you basing those feelings off of, what is equivalent to being a man?
For me, it came naturally. There were things that came naturally that I didn't understand, like why. But I do believe that a lot of it does pertain to the social construct that surrounds manhood, that surrounds womanhood and things of that nature. And it all just kind of boils down to what I was most comfortable with, especially growing up. I was playing with boy toys, and no, that does not necessarily make you a boy by default, but I believe that a lot of those things that was surrounding the social construct, being a man, that's what most related to me. And that's the part that I play into mostly as a trans man, not so much the biological aspects of it.
You came out with a podcast, and on the podcast you said that you are officially detransitioning from the LGBT plus community. You got a lot of backlash, you got a lot of hate. So what does that mean to detransition from a community that some may say, theoretically speaking, you are technically a part of?
Mm-hmm. So for me, the detransition portion was intended for a metaphor. A lot of people did not like that I was using it as a metaphor for whatever reason. I have no idea. But nonetheless, it's a metaphor to represent my social disassociation with the trans community, primarily the establishment, not so much the movement, and in a sense of advocating for rights, making sure that trans people are safe, and also discussing, the rights of trans children and things of that nature. That's one of the main things, though. But for me, it's just disassociating from the toxicity that the trans community has perpetuated for many years now, and no one wants to call it out. So I'm like, okay, I have to stand alone. I have to be an outlier. I have to be in my own group, essentially, and start bringing people together to start calling those toxic parts out. So.
What specifically, when you say toxic parts, so like what specifically, can you elaborate on that?
So one of the main things I mentioned in my video was imposition. Not everyone's going to agree with our way of life. That's just what it is. And as unfortunate as that may feel, as unfortunate as that may look, we have to accept that, because when we don't, it's going to quite literally mean that we are imposing on others. And I don't like that. I don't like it being done to me, because I lived that life. I don't want to do it to other people. And so that's one of the main toxic parts. And what I mean by imposition is specifically imposing new terminology that not everyone is going to agree with, specifically the term cisgender. There are some people who 100% agree with it and they're okay, and I'll gladly call you sis. If you know, there was a point in time when all the black women were calling each other sis. They were like, okay, sis. So like, hey, if that's what you want to be called, I'll call you sis. But for those who are telling me specifically that they don't like it, they don't want the imposition, I will respect that 1,000%.
So do you think the imposition is merely like the LGBT plus community, or do you think that's just like a general issue? Because some may argue that, oh, imposition comes from like the right and the left, or it's not. Do you think it's like just a general issue, or do you think it's vital within the LGBT community that's pushing this imposition?
I would say that it obviously, you know, imposition comes from all sides. You know, we see it with religion, we see it with, you know, racism and so on and so forth. And one of my main things is just wanting to find a balance so people can actually coexist. You know, the way that people are saying that we should is being able to exist alongside someone who does not agree with your view, but there's no threat. It shouldn't feel like a threat just because this person wears blue and you like to wear green. Okay, you don't ever have to mix the colors. You know, you don't ever have to say anything about what that person's wearing or what that person's doing. So, but of course, imposition comes from all sides. I just want to find a balance in between it all so that there's no more of this, oh, well, you can't do this because of this, and, you know, things of that nature. That's how I see it, at least.
So when you said earlier about cis woman as an example, what is the actual difference between a cis woman and a woman? Because some people say who are born women and who are born men, they do not want to be called cis in front of it. So what's the actual difference?
So a cisgendered person, whether it be a cis man or a cis woman, they are people who simply identify with their birth gender, that which they were assigned with at birth. So that's what cisgender is. But the difference for me, in my opinion, the difference between a woman and a cis woman is simply how they want to identify themselves. A woman is an adult human female. That is the prerequisite to be a woman. A lot of people don't like that I say this because it gets me in trouble, because it would therefore disenfranchise me as a trans man. But what I like to also put into perspective is, what is the prerequisite to be a trans man? You have to be an adult human female. So it all still works together. There does not, again, you can still wear a blue shirt while that person's wearing a green shirt, and it does not affect anybody. So that's, for me, that's what the difference would be. It's just a woman is simply someone who is an adult human female. From there, you can branch out. You can branch out and say, oh, I'm a trans woman. I represent these social aspects of what it means to be a woman, not the biological aspects. You can still be a woman. You can still be happy with who you are without having to say, oh, well, no, you got to call yourself a cis woman so that I can feel more comfortable with myself. That's where self-validity comes in, because it should not matter what you call yourself, or it should not matter what someone else calls.
How they perceive
you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it should not matter what someone else calls themselves. It shouldn't affect you, because again, they're wearing a green shirt, you're wearing a blue shirt. just go about your business.
Do you think there is an
You know?
issue with trans women specifically? And I'm using trans women, not necessarily trans men, because I think it's more of a social problem that people talk about. Do you think there's an issue with trans women, as a lot of people who are born women feel like they may be taking up space when it comes to like sports, or when it comes to just like taking over the word or what a woman is in a sense?
I feel like that there is just a huge war between trans women and women. And again, this kind of goes back to what we were discussing prior to, was the fact that trans women just have a little bit more of a difficult fight. And I try my best to take that into consideration, because one of the main issues with trans women is just simply passing as women. That's like one of the main issues, which is why they're also advocating for being able to transition prior to male puberty, because once male puberty hits, that's it. Like, you know, for a lot of them, that is it. They got the jawline, they got the body and everything of that of a male. So I try to take those things into consideration. But one of the main issues is that where it feels like the space is being taken up, is the fact that trans women are coming with a lot of flair, and they want their rights, which is fine. But there's also a reality, and I believe that identity is being mixed with actuality, and it's not one and the same. Unfortunately, a lot of the ways that people identify may not be what actually is. And so we have to take that into consideration. How far does biology go? And how far does identity go? Identity has gravity to it. And if we don't acknowledge the gravity, we're going to have a bunch of people jumping and can't fly.
So you mentioned prior about how the value in being perceived as what you want to be identified as, and that's where the conversation that I want to navigate to with current legislation around, specifically here in the state of Texas, Senate Bill 14, where essentially is allowing children will have to wait until they're 18 before getting on any hormonal treatment. Pretty much they can't get on puberty blockers. So what's your current thoughts about that? Do you think that is responsible, like that's in the state's responsibility to make the decision? Or do you think that's something parents should need to decide? Or do you think that, what's your current thoughts on it?
For me, I believe that there is a lot to be learned. And in one of my videos on my TikTok, I specifically stated that we need to pump the brakes when it pertains to allowing kids to transition, primarily because there's still so much to be understood about this portion of transitioning, how this will affect our bodies physically, not just the mental aspects, because hormones, affect, your psychology, but as far as the physical aspects, we have a very well-known transsexual man named Buck Angel, I believe, and he's like one of the first out there to begin taking testosterone. And he's had a lot of medical issues with his body, even though this is, how he's living his life. But it comes with consequences. And one of the things that I fear that the trans community is kind of forgetting about is there are consequences to these actions. So when it pertains to allowing kids to transition, it's just something that needs to get a little bit more of a study behind it, more legitimacy, more of a foundation than just, okay, we want to make sure that these kids don't hurt themselves, because then that just goes back to the validity that I told you I had since I was younger. Even whenever I was living as a girl and was uncomfortable in different forms, but I was not experiencing the level of discomfort within myself as a lot of these other young people are. And I feel that this is being perpetuated within the community, and it's crippling. It's having more of a crippling effect than it is actually helping these kids to overcome. Why are they depressed? Why are they feeling like they have to hurt themselves or essentially end their lives? That's a problem to me. And the fact that this is normalized in the community, that we have to give them hormones so they don't off themselves, that's not sounding right. Because one of the main arguments is that trans people have always existed in various cultures and centuries ago. They've always been here. Why weren't they offing themselves also? and they didn't have access to the hormone care or anything like that. So there's something that's being perpetuated, and I think it needs to stop before we try to continue that process. So I believe that in this particular time period, when it pertains to the Senate bill and things of that nature, it is responsible. Because right now it's just too much being mixed in and not enough structure. It's chaos, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a lot of times right now, especially in today's day and age, a lot of people like to glamorize the process, not really talking about the mental component, as we spoke about earlier, the emotional support that these children need. I think a lot of people are just thinking, okay, give them the pill, then next day they're transitioned.
Yeah.
Like, I know someone personally who is going through the process and is almost 30, and even they're dealing with it, so I can't really imagine someone who is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, however old they are, dealing with that.
Yes, it's a lot more to it than what we've made it. But yes, I definitely agree. And one of the things I said in one of my previous videos as well regarding transitioning, the question was, have I ever felt like this was the best decision for myself? And have I ever questioned my transition?
Like, did you ever regret it?
And I will honestly say, yes, there were moments, and I even have moments to this very day, to this day.
As a 26-year-old.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, okay, was I supposed to do it? I kind of miss, the old life. There are moments, and I feel that the community is afraid to acknowledge those very basic truths that people are going to question this. Even the people themselves who are actually undergoing the process. And with children, though, they're going to have people to blame once they get older. They're going to have their parents. They're going to have the people who blindly follow the trans ideology of transitioning their kid, when in reality, they just probably needed more guidance. They just probably needed more help rather than hormones. They need help, not hormones. And that's like my perspective. But it just goes back to establishing that self-validity and also making sure that people are properly educated on this. The reasons that I began my transition is not the same reasons why I maintain my transition. If my reasons for starting my transition were the same, I probably would have regretted everything. And it all goes back to the validity portion, and it also goes back to recognizing what reality is and accepting reality as it is. And I feel that that's no longer being accepted in the community, which is why we have people trying to achieve this transition goal of looking like a man or sounding like a man, which is fine. Trans men have it a little bit easier when it comes to that portion, but it's also the actuality. Are you actually a man? And once a lot of trans men or trans women start actually questioning that, then they're like, okay, well, I don't think I can ever actually be a man. So they detransition because they start losing that validity, they start losing themselves, they start realizing the impossibility of being able to reach that certain standard. And so that's where all the depression comes in, that's where all the regret comes in. But no one wants to actually address that in the community, and it's very problematic. So.
You said something earlier that really stuck with me, how even still to this day, there's even a little form of questioning yourself. Is this really what you're supposed to be doing? So I wanted to ask, because you did grow up Christian. So do you think that can be a battle between flesh and spirit? So whenever you're going through those emotions, is this what I'm supposed to be? Did I make the right decision? Do you think that's an internal battle between your spirit telling you no and your flesh telling you yes? Or what do you think that can be?
I think that's a good question, because I do one of the things I've been pretty open about on my TikTok page is that I'm open to believing again, and I'm open to exploring my faith, prayer, whatever else. I don't completely reject it. There was a point when I did, so but I don't at this point. And so, yeah, I can acknowledge that there is a part of me, or I guess in a way like a tug of war, that's wondering, okay, I'm not so much sure if it's spirit, but I do believe that there is a part of me that's kind of in the back of my mind that's like, hey, are you crazy? Did you just do this to yourself? Did you just like grow a beard and allow your voice to get like this? Like, because I used to be like a little pipsqueak, and now I'm like, so for me, it's very interesting to say the least. But yeah, I do believe that there is a slight tug of war within myself. I'm not afraid to acknowledge it, because that's the first part of the process, is acknowledging that part that you honestly don't want to, because I want to. There's a part of me that wants to adhere to everything that the trans community has told me, which goes back to the very beginning when I first started transitioning with those reasons. Yeah. Those reasons were terribly, terribly flawed. And again, that would have likely led to me detransitioning. If not today, it would have been tomorrow. So that's why I'm like, I have to keep this awareness, because if you lose your awareness, you're losing yourself, essentially. I don't want to do that. So, yeah. And
I wanted to ask, as we navigate towards religion, because you say that you are atheist, but after doing like research on you and everything like that, I'm not telling you what you are, but it gives very much like agnostic in a sense. Like, I feel like you believe that you believe something's out there, but it's more so you want like proof to validate those feelings.
Yes.
Can you elaborate more?
1,000%. That was great. Yeah, you told me about myself. But yeah, that's good. I definitely agree, because one of the things about me is I want to believe. I want to believe that there's something out there in the clouds, just chilling and saying, hey, don't do that. Make sure you love your neighbor as yourself. So I strongly want to believe that, just because of the comfortability. But again, it just goes back to the evidence. And I understand that there's evidence out there, which is very, some of it's pretty convincing, and some of it's like, okay, well, I can apply that to other religions or other thought processes that we know 1,000% aren't real. Zeus ain't real. We know this. But, but for me, I would definitely say that I am an atheist Christian in a way. Like, I know that's crazy. I know that's crazy to say, but like,
that's the first time I've heard that term.
I am an atheist Christian in the sense that I relate very, very close to Christianity. A lot of the principles, a lot of the belief systems, even with some of the things that pertain to being a man in Christianity. Like, and it's so weird. I'm not going to try to push this idea on anybody. So this is just me, my personal experience. But yeah, I would say at its core, though, I can't confirm nor deny if there's a God, but I would like there to be.
I think we don't emphasize the difference between religion and relationship.
Yeah.
So with religion, people deem themselves to a checklist. Oh, the Bible says A, B, and C. But when it comes to relationship, when Christ calls upon you, he just wants to get to know you. Just come as you are, and then we'll figure the rest out later. Right. And there's something that you said that I want to touch base on, is the evidence portion. Because do you believe that we as humans, there's certain things that we are not meant to know. There are certain things that our mind cannot fully comprehend. So when you speak about evidence and wanting evidence, wouldn't that negate the portion of faith? Because the whole point of faith is to have that solid belief.
Right. And that's where it begins to get shaky for me when it pertains to faith.
So when did you start to distinguish yourself from Christianity? Because the foundation of Christianity is just mainly accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. So when did you start to disassociate yourself from that foundation?
That started when I was at Oral Roberts University. That is a evangelical Christian college. And that's when I just simply started to question. I can recall whenever I first had my questioning, I was in the 6th grade. There was this kid named Mason. I'll never forget him. Red hair and freckles and blue eyes.
Shout out to Mason.
Shout out to Mason for doing this to me. Thanks a lot. But nonetheless, Mason kept asking the same question. He would say, how do you know it's a fact? How do you know it's a fact? And he kept doing it. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how what I feel that I know. So that was kind of like the beginning portions, but then I doubled down on my faith. But once I got into college, I readdress those questions, because it goes back to that thing that's in the back of my mind, the one that's in the back of my mind right now, that's like, okay, there could be a God. there was also that thing in the back of my mind that was like, okay, but maybe there wouldn't be, maybe there isn't. And so I finally looked in the mirror and looked at that thing, and I was like, okay, what do you have to say? My mom and dad are preachers, right? And my mom growing up, back around whenever I came out as homosexual, she told me that I was called to the LGBTQ. And I thought about that the other day, and I was like, wait a second, what's going on? Because it's interesting that she said that. And now I am in, like, I would say the beginning stages of what my calling is, in a way. Because I do feel that there is a lack in the LGBTQ, and, you know, of course, with my specific sect, the trans community, there's a lack of self-validity. And I strongly feel that that's where my mission is to teach people to just be who you are. I mean, you know, at the beginning, the LGBTQ stood for pride, and it's like, okay, where's y'all's pride? Like, everyone's just, you know, no one's actually as proud of themselves, and we're having to seek out this, or as I like to say, outsource for validation. But when you consistently outsource, you're going to drive yourself insane trying to get that validation from other people. Because the moment, you know, like as a girl, you know, you get all the compliments, and people say, oh my God, you're so pretty. But you get that one compliment, and somebody say, like,
hater.
That all of a sudden your day is ruined, and you're like, okay, well, I thought I was cute today. What happened? Like, so that's kind of like where the community is heading into. So I feel like that's where my space is, and I would like to advocate for that more. I do intend to start my podcast. I have a whole concept behind it, so I'm excited about that. Still trying to work out the kinks, but yeah, so podcast and advocate.